And it certainly wasn't a task that the task force could address when it came to the Building Act and the responses there.
And the second question from me is, I note in the table, I'll just try and find the page now, because that's always easier, 159 5.4.4, which is ensuring that the skirt work program is fully aligned with land drainage recovery program. When I flip through to page 240, where it's got the kind of explanation, it doesn't, you've ticked it off as being complete, but my reading from the response is that, in fact, we've got a long way to go towards being complete because of the optimisation that SCIRT have done, where it says it's become necessary to further optimise SCIRT repairs of stormwater infrastructure, and the repair strategy has been amended in order to reduce the overall rebuild cost. This may impact on what is being repaired by SCIRT. So I'm just really concerned that instead of getting the alignment that we needed, we've actually accepted that we're going to get a lower quality, a lower standard, and it's not going to happen. So can anyone just in very simple terms reassure me that the SCIRT design process is actually addressing some of these flooding issues? Because, I mean, I've got resolutions about the central city because I'm getting every day a start work notice for a new project and in areas that got flooded, and I'm not seeing any difference from what, you know, they're just putting back as was rather than what we should be putting back.
SCIRT's mandate is to repair broken infrastructure. As you state, we're going through an optimisation process, which means looking at if the damage is not critical, do we need to do it? Can we stress those assets in order to save money? And that is going on. It doesn't mean to say that we're not collaborating where the land drainage recovery work overlaps with the SCIRT project. Those collaborations do have and do continue to go on. But there will be less investment by SCIRT in stormwater work than was originally envisaged because of the capital rationing that's going on. And we're looking at if the defects are not critical, they will be left. And that is an issue for legacy for the city. But it's something that we have to realistically contain the rebuild within the funding available.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the request that we've made, the request we made was to change the parameters of SCIRT so that it didn't take this short-term, narrow view and actually leave us with a huge, costly, expensive legacy. So we haven't got back the recommendations we need to make to change the parameters. In fact, we've had the worst. What we've had come back is to say, well, SCIRT have changed for the worst, not for the direction that we want. So, you know, I'd really like us to move a recommendation, and I would seek guidance from the Chief Executive and the Mayor as to how we might be able to do this. But when our engineers are saying that they're incredibly concerned about what's being done, I don't think we can do nothing. I think we have to address this.
Turn that on. Oh, Jane, would you like to?
Yes, there have been discussions about the technical standards, but the city hasn't accepted reductions in standards for the very reasons that you are, I think, outlining, that we don't want to be left with a legacy. So there are ongoing discussions there.
Well, the optimisation process is, you know, is going on at the moment, and we all know that there are challenges in trying to resolve some of these issues, and it isn't just a straightforward, you know, we don't agree, and it isn't a straightforward, this is the way it's going to be. You know, like it is still being discussed at the moment. So, but the land drainage program isn't in the SCIRT program. It's kept within council. But there are things that SCIRT is doing that definitely has an impact on our land drainage program.
When I went to the community meetings, one of the really scary pieces of feedback that people were saying is the flooding had gotten worse after SCIRT had been there. Streets were being raised, and so the water was running off into people's houses worse than it was before the earthquake. So there's some pretty fundamental things. So can I suggest on that page on 159 that rather than put completed, there's actually something else that that we need to put to signal that we have to keep looking at this issue. We can't.
Can we go back up? Can we go back up the list of recommendations? Because I'm going to be the one moving this now because Phil Clearwater's had to go. So come down to keep going. Right. So instead of note that council are working with other agencies, can you put request that council staff working, so take out the word are, through the, and so add in, before Council Sarah Flood Steering Group, can you put Horizontal Infrastructure Governance Group? Comma, and then down, report to, so take out to ensure alignment of resources and actions, put report to the next council meeting, on the alignment, well, what's the phrase? On the alignment and coordination with respect to flood management, because they're all involved in a different way, but it's really important that all of them report individually to us. Is that right? David?
I'd just like to speak to 7.3 particularly. Given our financial position and procurement methods, how we can be 40% out on have a 40% increase in a pumping station in a short period of time. It does concern me somewhat that our estimations aren't that flash, our costings aren't that flash, and if we were in private enterprise, we'd probably be out of business very quick.
I suspect the land wasn't that flash either, but I'll get John to answer.
The estimate at the pre-concept design phase, there was a $4.35 million estimate with a confidence arrangement around that, plus 30 minus 20.
Yeah,
that
I think is the sort of the concept that I struggle with, and I saw it in another report somewhere where there were a whole lot of options and there were estimations -5 up to +30. How can we operate in such wide bands of variation? I think we need to be a lot tighter on our costings, and it's just I struggle really with this broad band of estimation, and then we invariably end up with a lot more cost. And I think we should be nailing our estimations or our quotations on these projects a damn sight better than we're doing at the moment, because we're just wasting money.
Not uncommon in the industry to have that sort of confidence level around an estimate at a feasibility stage. And again, it's a series of events from the resource consent conditions, the soundproofing, the geotech.
This is several $1 million.
Yep.
I don't think it's good enough.
We accept your point.
Jimmy.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. The first one, I'm particularly concerned at level 3, the affected property 948. What is the criteria, the rationale to define those locations and the boundary of those affected properties? For example, like Cashmere Road, my understanding between the number 211 to 236 and also the other in front of the Princess Margaret Hospital. Let's also have this situation, restricted access more than once as a result of the flooding belong to the level 3. So I'm wondering how to define, this boundary and location.
The level 3 vulnerability areas, or the numbers of that, were based on the number of surveys that came back, and those were from the people who didn't have flooding through their floors, didn't have flooding under the floors, but did have access flooding. So that's the ponding on the lawn, ponding on the road, which meant they couldn't get their car out, couldn't get their car in. So their access was denied. So it was the inability to actually move from your home to your place of work or school or business, whatever else. So that's how those were defined, those 948.
My understanding regarding the catchment wall, this the kind of area, still quite a few people make a complaint and raise this issue to the council. So whether this, is within this mayor task flood force or is outside, this is my particular concern. Whether it's part of this level 3.
I just think that this is going to be part of the next area of work where we look at the land drainage across the city, because there is a significant range of issues that we're going to have to address, and the task force was really focused on those people that were affected in the immediate sense, and to make sure that their needs were addressed. I mean, when we passed the resolution to have the 2 big engineering options go out for consideration, I mean, I attended both of those meetings, as did fellow councillors, and the feedback was, well, we're really pleased that you're putting all the effort in to do this work in 2 years, but 2 years is too long. I can't wait 2 years. And that's why I still want to get a sense of urgency, and that's what the task force has brought to the task, has been that sense of urgency. And we've got a lot of work done, and that is going to make a difference, but not to everyone. And I still want to, kind of focus our attention on the needs of those whose houses are still exposed, even with the temporary work that we've done, even with the temporary flood defence mechanisms that further work will be done on as a result of this report. The question then is what happens to those who won't be protected in the long term? Should we be including that? And so what I'm hearing from you is that the next stage around flood management, defence and retreat is the work that we're directing the Chief Planning Officer to undertake and report back to us.
Yep.
That's right.
Paul?
John, it's just around the timbering. You got Christchurch Road and you got the Paho and Sidley Place. $340,000 and $265,000. It seems like a huge amount of money, and the Paho Sidley Place to me seems like a much bigger job than the Christchurch Road. And just first of all, wondering the cost of doing that, and actually the cost of comparing the 2 different areas, and why there's such a large difference.
I can't go into the detail of the cost, but a large part of that cost is the difficulty in actually removing the silt. The silt is considered a hazardous material because it's contaminated. Generally, it's contaminated with wastewater.
So this actually includes all the desilting of those channels?
Yeah, and the dewatering and the management of that, and the disposal at a sanitary landfill. It's a Class A landfill site. So this is expensive operation.
Okay. No, that makes some sense.
Right. Yanni?
Thank you. Sorry to ask a few more questions, but just in terms of, I think it's quite encouraging. You haven't touched on it, but I think it's an important point just to go over, which was the new subdivisions, how they perform, the systems that were put in place. It seems like you've come back, and the conclusion is that they're not worsening flooding, and the mitigation requirements have been fully implemented. I think there were some subdivisions like Morgan's Valley where there was a lot of concern in the community, but that doesn't come through in the findings. So I just wanted, maybe if you could just briefly reflect on, do we need to do more work at looking at those systems, or some systems seem to be working but others don't?
Yeah, just talking about the new subdivision site, so that's driven by the surface water strategy, the 2009, the 30-year strategy that was developed, where we start, when we're putting onto the developers a 50-year requirement for the design for that return period. So that means off-site effects are no worse than pre-development. So therefore there's detention dams, there's infrastructure put in place there to manage quantity and quality of that water. Morgan's Valley, there was some occasions where there was defects in some cases. Can't be too specific on which ones you're referring to, but at large, most of them perform very well during during those events through March and April. And I think that demonstrates that our planning standards and the policy objectives we have actually are working to a large extent. But it doesn't mean to say that we don't get asset fails, asset defects, inundation with debris and tree branches and all sorts of things that contributed to some of those effects we saw in March.
I think maybe just flag, there's possibly some work around the hill subdivisions that are quite different.
I think Morgan's Valley was certainly, there were pre-existing issues there with that subdivision. So I think that, that as part of the land drainage, that overall perspective, I think we'll raise that specifically with the Chief Planning Officer. All right, so that the resolutions now are receiving the task force final report, noting the work completed to date and thanking the task force team and council staff and contractors for working to produce rapid outcomes, approving an increase in funding, noting the concern there. Request that relevant council staff review the floodplain management options for the Lower Heathcote for inclusion in the LTP, working with other agencies to identify potential funding mechanisms and that for the temporary flood defence. Requesting the Chief Operating Officer to incorporate the balance of the task force recommendations relating to maintenance. I've added in there and advise council of any shortfall in funding so that this be considered during the LTP process. Request the Chief Planning Officer to undertake the further policy development work and then request the council staff work with other agencies to produce these, to produce these reports to us. And then the Dudley Creek options to be reassessed and reported back by the end of October. That council staff urgently prepare a report on central city flooding issues, that council staff contact SCIRT to inform them of that particular work in the central city, and that council support the establishment of community flood defence plans linking local community groups and organisations with metropolitan and civil defence planning. So I think that's pretty universal. Is that all right? So, yep.
7.8, do you want us to name all the agencies there, or?
No, they're groups. So it's the Horizontal Infrastructure Governance Group. There is a Council Sarah Flood Steering Group, and there's an ECAN Council Stormwater Issues Management Group. And we want all three of them, all three groups, so they're three separate groups, to report to the next council meeting. All right?
Can't see an issue with it.
Yanni?
Had a quick conversation with the Chief Operating Officer. Oh yeah, cool. Looking the wrong way. Just there's some concern about what the implications of that second amendment in regards to the central city is, which is around current projects that are underway. So just to kind of give you that feel, I don't know if Joan, if you want to add anything, but my concern is that the money's being spent now and we're not addressing the flooding. I think the concern from staff is that essentially if we hold up these projects, it will also cost us money. So and could add to delays. So I just want to be really clear. I think it's probably good to get some staff advice over this. Yeah. I'm pretty adamant from my point of view that allowing SCIRT to do the work now without knowing what the issues are seems pretty silly. And we simply cannot afford to go back later when the curb and channel is put in, when the drainage is put in. I just don't think we'll be able to afford it. But I think it's important we hear from staff on this issue.
Yeah, my only concern that I didn't want us to sign up to something we couldn't do, but I understand what Yanni wants to achieve, and I wonder whether if in the second line we could seek, and I'm coming from the perspective of projects underway, it's all designed and half done, it's really hard to seek alignment and cost efficiencies without a major stoppage, which is what you're saying. But if we could seek alignment and cost efficiencies where possible, could you live with that?
I mean, it's still like that big picture stuff, because my understanding is most of the central city stuff's already been designed. So I don't want SCIRT. I want to be a can-do council, not a can't-do council. And I think what we've seen with SCIRT, with the whole flood thing, has been quite negative, really. Let's be honest. It's going the other way rather than the right way. But I'd be interested in how other councillors and the mayor and
I think
the chief executive.
You keep referring to SCIRT as if it's a third party. Yeah. We are a third of the governance group. So actually bringing it up with the Horizontal Infrastructure Governance Group is the right place. But I've got no problem with council staff contacting SCIRT to inform them of the work that we have asked them to do on reporting on central city flooding issues, because they may in fact be in a really good place to help inform that that work. So, and it may be that if they're looking at it from a the contract on the ground point of view, then often you can find alignment and cost efficiencies if you focus your mind on it rather than not. So I've got no problem with that. I don't know that we need, where possible, in there. We're asking them to seek alignment. We're not directing alignment.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Okay.
All right. So on that basis, I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you.
For a substantial amount of work. And the next item on the agenda